specifically with regards to traveling alone, so solo traveling, what would you tell people about loneliness, people who are worried about getting out there and being lonely?
Well, it depends on the nature of the journey that you're doing. If your journey is you know, a very physically demanding undertaking, you probably won't have to worry about loneliness at all because every minute that you're awake, you will be consumed by the task. Because when you're alone, there's no division of labor. You can't have one person go fetch water, the other person get the tent up, another person chop firewood. You can't even take for granted having one person in the bow of the canoe look at the GPS or the map while the other guy paddles. Every moment of the day, you essentially have a task in front of you, right? It can be a challenge if you do have to look at a map. It's another reason why to get good at navigating intuitively. If the wind is against you or the current is against you, even looking at a map can be a challenge because I use the expression, you can't take your hands off the wheel, being your paddle. You need two hands on that paddle at all times. Even just getting a drink of water is a challenge now, right? If you set down your paddle, the wind is going to blow you where you don't want to go. It's going to blow you into the shore. Or often in northern Canada, it can be hard to find a landing spot for a canoe. The shoreline might be nothing but alders and willows, and it's like a swamp, like a mangrove swamp almost of the north. Or it could be cliffs, or it could be mud flats. It could be hard to get in there. So, even just going to shore for some routine task is a pretty big undertaking. So almost from the moment you wake up and you have to start packing up your sleeping bag, rolling up your clothes, taking down your tent, portaging everything back down to the lakeshore, to the moment that you hit the sleeping bag at night, you will be busy. So you don't really have time for the loneliness. Now, there are circumstances like where I described being windbound, where the wind has forced you on shore, and now you have all the time in the world, a minute's drag. That's when maybe people will start to experience loneliness. But there's definitely a cure for that. And it's the oldest one in the book, which is bring something to read. One of my favorite adventure stories is Joshua Slocum, who was the Nova Scotia sailor. He was the first person ever to sail alone around the world. He did it back in the 1890s. And
Really?
he wrote a fabulous book about it called Sailing Alone Around the World. And it took him close to 3 years to do it. And he wasn't really in a rush. He just did it. He was an old sailor. And the age of sail had ended, and steamboats had come to the fore. And he said, "I'm going to build my ship and sail alone around the world." And in his book, he talks about loneliness, and loneliness of the most extreme sort, where he's on a boat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean or in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And he famously wrote, he said that his books were ever his friends, that he found that it wasn't good to be alone, but when he had his books, he was no longer alone because his books were always his friends. And I definitely can relate to that feeling on my journeys, just having a book I really enjoy, getting to read it. It's like a chocolate bar or something. It's such a nice feeling like, oh, yeah, I'm windbound, which is too bad, but I'm going to make a nice little fire, have a cup of tea, and really dive into this nice little book, and then I don't really feel lonely here. Of course, the other thing you can do is stay active. I'm always busy taking notes. I'm going to go look at these plants, lichens, see what I can find, look at the trees, look at the wildlife. All these things sort of dispel any feeling of loneliness when you're active and engaged, which is another reason why I think anyone who's traveling in wild places should, maybe pack a field guide to the birds or to the plants. And if you have a field guide, all of a sudden, you don't have time to be lonely because it's like, oh man, I figured out what this flower is, or I figured out what this bird is that I keep seeing. And, it adds another dimension to the journey and it makes it more rewarding.